the notion that you build it and the customer will come is not true, right? So you have to put in place all the supporting marketing, messaging, positioning, everything that is part of a traditional sales process. It's not basically, hey, I built it on XYZ hyperscaler, and now I'm going to fold my arms and wait for the register to ring. It does not work that way, right? So I think first and foremost is exactly to Bryan's point, is understanding what are those programs, what are those co-marketing programs, what are things that I can really see myself taking advantage of because what I bring to the table adds value to the customer.
Today's episode is brought to you by the Partner Insight newsletter, your weekly data-driven source on partner-led growth. What's the secret behind most successful partnerships and go-to-market strategies? Data and insights. And that's exactly what Partner Insight brings to your inbox every week. We give you the numbers, the trends, and the strategic insights straight from the partnership playbooks of top-performing tech companies. Join the community of thousands of partnership and go-to-market leaders who stay ahead of the curve with our newsletter. It's the knowledge and inspiration you need to help you build strong partnerships, grow in cloud marketplaces, and create a successful tech ecosystem.
I'm really excited to have today with us Avanish Sahai and Bryan Williams. Avanish, Bryan, great to have you today.
Hey, Rowan, great to see you. Thanks for having me.
Rowan, great to be here.
Like both of you don't really need introduction, but I'll just give you a few facts. Avanish was one of the people who started Google Cloud's marketplace and was in the very beginning of Google Cloud, and then he was before in Salesforce leading marketplace as well. So Bryan used to work in Xero and had like a amazing career there, and then he decided to share all this knowledge with a bunch of other people, and now he is leading Hockey Stick Advisory. Today we're going to be talking about hyperscalers, and we're going to be talking how to sync yourself with giants, how to align with big marketplaces, and how to win there. So, but before we jump into that, Avanish, Bryan, I would love to you to give a little bit of introduction about your experience.
So I've been in the tech business for a very long time, and I won't say since when because it makes me feel really old, but I have really seen kind of a pretty dramatic evolution over the last 12, 13 years from the point of view of how both companies are selling and how customers are buying, right? So you mentioned Salesforce. I was there with the App Exchange team from the early days to growth. And I was also at ServiceNow, where we built out the technology partner program as well as a ServiceNow store, which is another marketplace. Google Cloud has been, one of the fast-growing hyperscalers, which we'll talk more about. So yeah, it's been a fun cycle to see the changes happening, and frankly, I think we're just the beginning of that cycle. So even more fun to talk about what's coming.
On my side, I previously led Xero's ecosystem team across Australia and New Zealand, and so I was over there for over 5 years. So that marketplace grew from 150 apps when I started to over 1,100 during my tenure, and been in the space and chatting to all the industry players along the way. I remember chatting to Scott Brinker in the early stages of HubSpot and getting it going, which Avanish knows well, and to see them grow from a couple of hundred apps up to 1,300 plus today and continue to rise, and many more alongside continue that journey has been really interesting. And so now I'm out spending time with a lot of the upcoming players in these marketplaces today around how do they drive growth either alongside with other players horizontally or try and tap into these marketplaces, and what's the best way to go about that?
To kick us off, would be interesting to start with a little bit of a high level. I think everyone kind of understands like what is hyperscalers, and let's talk about cloud marketplaces. That's this like big giants to facilitate. Obviously, everyone sees that they are picking up in terms of momentum over the last, maybe a few years, especially. But Avanish, where do you see this is going?
Yeah, look, I think the cloud marketplaces are one facet of the growth of the hyperscalers, right? So let's just step back a bit and just look at the sheer numbers, right? And I'll focus on AWS, Microsoft Azure, and Google Cloud, because those are the three big ones that we see here. There's more, of course, globally. But if you look at the growth on those three alone, right, they're really transacting multi-billion-dollar commitments. That is mind-blowing from an infrastructure perspective, right? Which is basically they're telling their customers, move your workloads to our infrastructure and give us a commitment of sometimes 3 years, sometimes 5, sometimes even 10 years. And they can range from a few million dollars to literally more than $1 billion. That is a amazing change in kind of how software is deployed and consumed, right? So and they have a backlog, right? They have a huge, once they start selling these large deals, if it's a 5-year deal, they're going to consume it over 5 years. If it's a 10-year deal, over 10 years, and so on. So with that, just as a quick background, the marketplaces are one of the mechanisms that allows the end customer to basically burn down those commits, as we say, right? So these are, think about it as $1 billion in credits, right? Like a prepaid cell phone. And over time, you're going to consume it. As you consume the minutes, you pay for it, right? And you kind of you kind of burn down those credits. Same idea, right? And of course, when you think about those kind of numbers, the underlying framework is consumption. So the marketplaces are doing is allowing the hyperscalers to bring in technology partners, ISVs, application partners, and say, hey, you can help the customer burn down those commits. So at least that's the context. I don't know, do you guys see other aspects of that? I mean, there's obviously a lot of, we'll talk a bit about the specifics, but any other kind of macro things that you see going on with the hyperscalers?
Once you've got one of these solutions in play as effectively the orchestrator working with these companies, then you're within their procurement cycles and the marketplace which exists today. So in order to choose more options in and around there, if it's a vetted solution alongside these, whether it is Google, AWS, effectively, then it just makes it easy for the end customer to be able to choose and buy. And with the explosion of the number of applications out there, and it's hard to navigate around to go about it, if something's very high up working alongside these marketplaces, then in order to bring that in and effectively solve workflows, which is all gaps, which is what the large marketplaces do to solve a niche, then I'm not surprised at seeing the increase and rise of these marketplaces to go with it. I'd add to it as well, it significantly drops or increases actually the switching costs for someone to jump out of these 5-year deals of what you're talking about, Avanish. It's just not going to happen. The company's way too invested to go with it. So if you're building solutions alongside and go on a journey, you can solve gaps as long as the likes of AWS doesn't build over the top of you, or you stay ahead of them if they do. There's lots of upside there.
I see that customers basically switch, right? So as soon as they adopt this model of procurement, they switch to the new model, and they also tend to tell their friends, obviously, that is great, and it's kind of like pretty seamless. Also, it's worthwhile to mention that the commission dropped like quite substantially, so it's more like a sort of almost analogous to like credit card, transaction commission, sort of 3%. And finally, I think what is interesting is that sort of on the customer side, people in B2B are getting used to purchasing large amounts through marketplaces. They were not ready to do that like kind of before, I think, but at least this is what sort of McKinsey study showing. Avanish, you've been in the very beginning of marketplace movements with Salesforce, right? Which is basically pioneered the entire marketplace concept. Then Apple adopted it, and then the rest of the history. How do you see this marketplace concept is sort of evolving, right? And also maybe you would talk a little bit more about how hyperscalers now add different private offers, consulting partners, channel partners, and so on.
It has been a phenomenal evolution, like I said, in 12, 13 years. So initial back in history, right, the marketplaces really were listings, and that's about it, right? It was a listing of your partners, and there was a link, and it would take you to their website. That's how they started. Now, I mean, if you think about all the things a marketplace does, right, and I think about it in kind of primarily in 3 buckets. So one is discovery, right? It allows the customer to discover what solutions are tied in with that particular platform, right? And that platform could be a Salesforce, could be an Atlassian, could be a HubSpot, or it could be a hyperscaler like AWS, GCP, as we were saying. But that validation is important, right? And I think the point you both raised about procurement being more comfortable with this is because they're counting on the vendor, the platform provider, having vetted, right? There's been a process through which that application from a third party has landed on that marketplace, right? There's vetting, there's business vetting, there's technology vetting, that it works seamlessly. So discovery allows that process to happen, right? And it's about reducing the friction in that cycle. Number two, it's transactions, right? More and more, when they were just a pure listing, there was no transaction. But now they enable transactions. And yes, there are things like the marketplace have become much more sophisticated. So things like a private offer, which is essentially a negotiation, right? It's not just a click to buy. There is a negotiation. You can price it individually. You can set terms. These things did not exist 5 years ago. And then one after the other, the hyperscalers have all added that as one of the core sets of functionality. Or things like reseller support, right? That's another thing that, usually the marketplaces were directly between the, let's say, the hyperscaler and the customer. But as we know, a lot of customers buy through resellers. So that's another multi-tier distribution element of a marketplace that is starting to played out. And then one of you mentioned, the lower marketplace fees. I think, Roman. Look, in the early days, it was 20%. That was a rev share that, frankly, most partners looked at and said, that's a bit salty. And in the last 15, 18 months, there's been a rapid movement between, again, Microsoft led it, and then Google and AWS followed. It's down to 3%. 3% is a low transaction cost, right, to get exposed to that install base. So there are a lot of things that are changing that allow that process from discovery to transaction, and ultimately deployment is the last piece, which is if it's been well integrated, if it's been well vetted, then that deployment should be seamless, right? And all of those, at the end of the day, it's about reducing friction. And that's, I think, the key element that marketplaces have, I think, learned how to do, is reduce that friction in the buying process.
I agree with all of that, and I've seen some of the evolution sort of come through. I think the role of the agency and service partners to remove that friction is incredible to see, and I expect that to continue to rise because there is so many solutions out there, and it is all about workflows and frictionless experiences, like you said, Avanish. I think the role that they play in and around for not only distribution but for that service component ongoing is going to continue to rise. And for the companies I see upcoming who want to play in that space, they're looking for one or two things primarily. Number one, they're looking for net new business opportunities and where can they sort of tap in and sort of ride the wave alongside the hyperscalers or the platforms alike. And the second one is the services revenue. And so how do they actually service the companies ongoing beyond deployment and move into that space? And that's where I see them going back to the marketplaces, looking for solutions and where can they plug gaps or holes to solve workflows ongoing. And from that, it's really spawned the whole industry across all platforms and the hyperscalers alike around companies getting huge amounts of momentum to be able to service a large amount of customers ongoing for a period of time. And with that as well, they build up their capabilities, their people and their teams and their whole business units around servicing particular needs. And so as we see the depth going towards a hyperscaler or another, they're not going to be all in on AWS and work really deep with that one and then also equally be able to serve Microsoft or other ones if they don't facilitate and have team members accordingly to it. So I think we're going to see more niche services alongside those ones as they build out their offerings to go with. But the trends are definitely shaping up that way.
For me, it's really fascinating just to use a simple analogy that marketplaces will or may become like sort of Amazon of software, right? Basically use the same business model and facilitate a lot of transactions. But I've seen companies like Palo Alto and also CrowdStrike, they now sort of moving into marketplace first, go to markets. Obviously, they are cybersecurity, which is really easily sort of aligned with with big hyperscalers. But I'm curious, Avanish, do you think more companies will go to the marketplace first as a channel, or like at least in terms of the partnerships focus?
I think marketplaces are part of the channel mix, right? I don't think anybody will go exclusively. You mentioned Palo Alto; they're one of the biggest partners for Google Cloud, for example, but they also work with AWS, right? So, and they also, I think, have some work going on with Azure. So it's a question of figuring out one, where's the customer going, right? And I think the point that Bryan raised, I agree with, is most customers are actually looking at a multi-cloud world. They're not looking at a single vendor. I think they got burned by single vendors in the past. So I think they will end up having one, more than one, I should say, two, maybe even three sometimes. They could be, some of them could be use case specific, some of them could be two major contracts. And then the marketplaces are part of the channel strategy for the ISVs, the tech partners and ISVs, and the services partners, which I think is a great call out from Bryan, into those, right? Which is, hey, this is where the customers are aggregating. This is how they're consolidating their spend. There's incentives for them to consume applications from the marketplace. So I need to figure out who are the right customers for my, what's the right marketplace for my offering, right? So I'll give an example here, which I think is pretty telling, right? So if you're a company, a tech company or an ISV that's in the retail space, guess what? You're not going to go to run your software on AWS because the parent company of AWS, Amazon, happens to be your biggest competitor, right? So for them, if you're in the retail space or the manufacturing slash supply chain space, chances are you're going to work with Azure and GCP, okay? It's just a natural choice. So those kind of things, I think those decisions are a combination business and technology decision. And again, they become part of the channel mix. I think marketplace will play increasingly, for the reason we were saying earlier, a very critical role, but it doesn't mean that they will stop working with traditional resellers or distributors, or that they will completely, move to a channel model and not have a direct sales team. I think it's becoming more and more of a mix. It's just becoming a more important part of that mix is how I would think about it. What do you guys think?
I would add to that, if they're a more established company offering, then a multi-channel makes a lot of sense. And like you said, they've got various options around how do they go to market, and depending on the marketplaces, they'll get in and look to fuel those and grow with them. The thing about the hyperscalers is they've got their own rules of this is our partner programs and come on the journey, and so you have to start, play there, and maintain there just as a baseline to go with it. But I'd add, over recent years, I've seen a lot of companies who start their journey as nearly like the springboard to launch on a marketplace. And so they build on platform, not just building to the platform to go with it. And on the platform side, especially on Xero's journey, they took many young upcoming apps with them on tour, whether data automation or reporting or filling certain gaps. And they got to a certain stage of growth, just building only with Xero. And then they would leapfrog out and then go build to other accounting solutions, build horizontally and from that. So they can be a good springboard to go with it. Interestingly, the trends of where they came from and they were sourced or created from were typically someone saw a gap. They were using the host solution, the platform, the hyperscaler, and they said, oh, no one does this and we really need this custom component. They built it out for themselves, loved it. And then there's this migration like, oh, others like this as well. And so there was a lot of accounting firms who saw this, and I've seen this sort of play out. And then from there, they're building these multi-million-dollar companies on the back of it once they realize there's much wider demand for the problems that they saw and solved for to be able to go wider. So, Avanish, I agree with you, but I think that it depends on the stage of growth of the companies building to it, and then whether how do they sort of distribute it going forwards.
If I could just add to that, I think that's a fantastic point, right? Which is both the hyperscalers and the app vendors now have these startup programs, right? Which I think is one of the additional things that have evolved, which is, hey, we want startups to have new ideas, having, interesting innovation to come to our platform, right? And in the beginning of time, chances for you to do, support your application on multiple platforms is is challenging. So I think it's a great point, right? Which is companies get created, and certainly in the world of Salesforce, we had a number of them that were exclusively on the Salesforce platform at the time of platform as a service, right? Which was ServiceMax and Aptus and Encino and so many others. They've actually become multi-$100 million companies by building on one platform. So I think that's a great call out.
Yeah, and I think what I've seen is in that journey as well, Avanish, there was a period of time where the upcomers, before they had some of these startup accelerators within their programs, they're kind of stalled. They're trying to get going. They're trying to solve the chicken and the egg, and they're trying to get momentum. So, hey, we want to work with you. But they're saying the programs, how they traditionally evolve is we'll work with our key accounts or the top big international vendors alongside us, and the upcomers, it's kind of fend for yourselves, and we'll chat to you once you get momentum. But therefore, inherently, they can't get the momentum to sort of grow. And so, what I've seen, the Slack Developer Fund, which kicked off a few years ago to fuel a lot of those innovations and coming through, has been quite incredible. And Roman, some of your breakdowns of Slack recently of the number of actual app partners for paid accounts, quite notable to go with it. It was just last week, or actually the week before, that Canva announced a $50 million developer fund right now to get it going. And for them, it's amazing. They've got 125 million users. They've got a wait list of 11,000 developers right now to go with it. And so what's going to happen to their whole app marketplace and explode through? It's going to be explosive coming through. And that playbook, where there is a startup accelerator, whether the HubSpot startups, Shopify's PCAP program, where they're effectively picking and choosing those key apps who solve gaps alongside them, where they're not going to build out themselves. It's great customer outcomes in the end, but it does spawn a whole new upcoming industry, which is great to see.
Super important. We had a discussion about Asana, Sharifa, Shiber first in Asana, and then Shiber in Loom. In Asana, the startup program wasn't successful, and in Loom it actually was. So it's kind of like there's a certain playbook, right? Like how to do it right. But we're gonna go deeper into what is do's and don'ts of partnering with cloud marketplaces. But now that we sort of mentioned like different ways how hyperscalers and marketplaces sort of scale, Avanish, I would love us to do a little bit of detour and just kind of ask you about Google success, because I think it's interesting, like how Google Cloud was the latest in the hyperscalers kind of race, and it seems that it's picking up, the momentum is picking up, and you've been in the midst of this journey sort of from the early days. I would love you to maybe share, if possible, like what kind of work for Google, how comes that it became so successful.
Yeah, no, Google Cloud is a fantastic example of what, frankly, focus does and great product experience does, right? So those of us who've known Google for, as the core engine and kind of Google, the productivity products and so on, the experience has always been fantastic, right? And a lot of what Google Cloud brought to the table was that kind of ease of developer experience, understanding what are the innovations that can help them differentiate, whether it's Kubernetes as a framework to be portable, whether it's now AI. I think what is really driving a lot of the innovation and the growth in Google Cloud, frankly, AI has been part of the Google story for forever, just wasn't called out as much, right? And I think now the marketing and the positioning is starting to catch up with that, which is you've got core capabilities with the company that probably has the most amount of data than any other one to build their models, to expose them. So that's one, right? It's just a core technology and experience. Two, frankly, was a refocusing with Thomas Kurian coming in about 4.5 years ago, 5 years ago, to really a go-to-market model that put partners first. And I think that has been another big example of where, yes, there is a sell to transaction, but it comes with a sell with, if it makes sense, then joining the program, understanding how to really drive joint customer solutions, both horizontally and for industries. That's the program. Those are the programs we started there. That I think has made a huge difference to how Google has accelerated. I mean, and the Again, the numbers are mind-boggling, and I think they're at a $30 billion run rate this year. They were less than $4 billion when I joined. So if you just think about scale, it's a massive scale, and I think it all focuses around great products and then a great go-to-market that's aligned with the customer and the partner, and trying not to compete with them. That's another key element of that story.
I've heard Google Cloud mentioned recently 100,000 partners that they have, which is pretty impressive number. I think Microsoft has sort of more than that, obviously, but Microsoft has been kind of working with partners forever, and I think for Google to catch up with so many partners, it's really impressive.
Yeah, that covers all classes of partners, right? So it covers technology partners, services partners, delivery partners, all the classes of partners are covered in that. But it is a very partner-centric model. So definitely executing on that.
Amazing. Thinking like from a SaaS company, let's say, perspective, right? And thinking if I'm like a startup or scale up CEO, and I'm thinking what are the ways for me to partner with this hyperscaler marketplaces. So would love us to dig deeper into decision tree, like who do I choose and how? Like what would be criteria? I think we mentioned previously number of customers, which makes big difference. Maybe native adoption of certain technology stack, like AWS, for example, or Google. Maybe something else.
You can't really expect that if you're an upcoming company, a growing company, you see one of these major players and think that they're going to give you the attention that you really want. Everyone's going to these companies thinking distribution. They know they've got the thousands of customers. They know they own the decision-making matrix, exactly to Avanish's point before, around multi-year cycles. And it's like, if only AWS would pay attention to me, we'll get on the journey too of this big rocket ship. And the reality is, companies need to play by their rules, understand their programs inside and out. Of course, work with their teams as much as possible, but it's only going to get you so far. And if you're in that journey to try and grow with them, it's the baseline and it's the expectations, and you have to do all the things to make sure that you're the easiest partner to work with. But like the growth we just spoke about before, there's hundreds of thousands of other partners potentially also knocking on the door. So how do you stand out? And that's where I encourage companies I work with to partner up and work alongside each other for similar offerings which are close to the core of them. So if the default is the hyperscaler and you're solving a key component, what would your ideal customers or current customers use before and after you, alongside the hyperscaler to go with it? They're likely to have the same amount of resources, the same amount of aspirations, and the same sort of dreams to sort of also knock on the hyperscaler's doors. And so I really like before, Avanish, you said to sell with partners and the sort of explosions of Google's components, that it became an embedded part of the DNA. And for the upcoming companies, if you're able to actually have that same mentality that you're working with others around it, I think it was Sanir at Bryan said, partnering up, you want to use OPM, as in other people's money, other people's product, sales, and marketing. And I quote that one a few times because it's quite true, right? Because you're selling with partners to do it. And so that's an approach I've seen sort of make momentum and move forward.
There's a couple of things that I'll say that may be a bit controversial, but I think they have to be said. One, the notion that you build it and the customer will come is not true, right? So you have to put in place all the supporting marketing, messaging, positioning, everything that is part of a traditional sales process. It's not basically, hey, I built it on XYZ hyperscaler, and now I'm going to fold my arms and wait for the register to ring. It does not work that way, right? So I think first and foremost is exactly to Bryan's point, is understanding what are those programs, what are those co-marketing programs, what are things that I can really see myself taking advantage of, because what I bring to the table adds value to the customer, right? And that is my second point, which is, look, I'm a technologist like all of us, but often when we start a company, when we build our own technology, we kind of fall in love with it and think that it's awesome. It probably is, but if you're not showing what the value to the customer is, if you're not, I mean, the point we talked earlier about friction, if you're not making it easy for them to understand where you fit, like Bryan said, what are those workflows that you're adding to? They're not going to do that homework on their own, right? So you have to explain that to them. So one, don't fall in love with your technology. Two, do the work that it takes to sell your product, right? I think those are fun, they're basic lessons, but often I find myself in conversations where people forget that. And they just think, hey, if I build it on, a certain cloud, all my problems are over. And that is not the case.
Can you possibly quantify that in terms of like what is the percentage of success, just to like, let's say like listing is maybe 5% of success out of the entire work that should be done. And then also would be interesting to hear your opinion in terms of potentially sort of like doing co-sell, and how do you plug into this co-sell motion? How do you connect with all the sellers on the ground, right? I was listening recently, Ben Horowitz talking about that you need to not only list, but then you need to actually talk with all field sellers across potentially geographies to make sure that you are top of mind, that your product is known, and then you talk with them, kind of sharing your leads and also like talking about their leads. But it's not trivial. Like, how do you do that?
So you build an integration to the hyperscale of the marketplace. You play by the rules of what it does. What it actually gives you access to is to be vetted, as per Avanish said before, as a solution on there, and to make sure you're known. And so if someone's searching there for the discovery part, that point one that Avanish made, then they're able to find your solution, and you want to do what you can and build reviews. So that's kind of like product-led growth, set and forget, hope, as Avanish said, of like someone will stumble along you, against the myriad of solutions. From there, the options you've got the various events and conferences where they're hoping to bring their customers towards it. You might be able to get along, play a part in accessing that environment. From there, understanding the teams of like you said, Roman, around who's actually in charge of actually of the various go-to-market, and then in particular what that actually is. Is it the service partners component? Is it for the enterprise component? Is it for these multi-year licenses? Is it their downstream? So you need to get to understand their sales teams, and the most important component, what their individual KPIs are and what they care about. I like this old sales adage of KPIs drive behavior. So if it's one territory manager or portfolio, or they're trying to onboard customers, or this multi-year license they're trying to close, you need to Avanish's point before. You need to work out how your solution not only helps the company and adds to the workflow, but what actually moves the needle is if you help that AE, that seller, that sales team in your solution somehow accelerates that cycle or adds more value to it or makes them look good, that's the one where I see companies and sales teams bring in app partners, targeted ones, regardless of any partner programs, reviews, profiles, components to go with it, because you're actually helping them achieve what they care about personally, which is going to allow them to hit their targets to move forward.
Bryan, I think you covered pretty much everything. I think the only couple things I would add to that is, first of all, I think the understanding of the KPIs and the compensational model, right? It really determines behavior, and is in the target segments that you're going to go after with them. And I think that's a really important point, which is, what is the segmentation? Because you could spray and pray and hope that things land. Usually that does not work, right? So how can you get to a relatively refined set of target by size, by geography, by industry, by maturity, all those things? That's work that you have to do. So Ron, with your question, what makes it work? When I've seen it work well is the person across the table from me, let's say the head of channels for a partner, if they can be thoughtful and precise about that process, and they don't just come up and say, hey, give me, right? It's the how can you be as focused, and frankly, in the beginning, you don't need hundreds of accounts. You probably need 10, 15, 20. So in order to get 10 accounts, can I get 40 opportunities, right? So that narrowing it down and then proving the case, exactly to Bryan's point, that one, you help them either close a deal or grow a deal or drive down consumption. Those are the three things that matter. And if you look at a comp plan, it's some combination of those, right? Net new logos, great. Drive down consumption, fantastic. Grow the ACV of an existing customer, awesome. So figure out what motion you're going to support and then align with the solution story that tells that. And by the way, again, I can't say this enough. I'm an engineer by training. I love technology, but it's not just about the technology. It's about the value you're bringing. So you have to have case studies. You have to have examples. You have to do that homework to show why someone will choose you. And right now, in the market we're in, it's even more important to do that, right? So being able to tell that value story and not, you're not a vitamin, you're a painkiller, is super important.
Yeah, this is like a really good segue to talk a little bit more about Better Together story, right? And I think would be interesting to frame it in a way that, like, what are the questions that people should be asking within this Better Together story that they are not asking today? What are the things that they sort of missing typically, right? I guess typically they forget about customer, they focus on the revenue growth that they would like to achieve. But sort of what are the non-obvious things that they should be asking themselves?
You framed it up nicely because of the traditional answer, which is just sales driven. This is our features. This is what we do. This is what we're all about, and no one cares. The question should be inversely asked of, what are you trying to achieve? What's the gaps? Exactly to the sort of 3 points Avanish made just earlier. So you're trying to grow and close some of these accounts. You're trying to grow the accounts. You're trying to retain the accounts in these economic components as well to go with it. And then you need to make sure you've got a strong value proposition which actually solves the other party in order to sort of get your attention. So this is true when you're working like horizontally with other app partners. You're helping the sales team of the hyperscalers to win, but also the service agency components to go with it. If you can't onboard and distribute yourself, or you're looking for a distribution of partners to go with it, when you go knock on the service agency's door, they've already got full motions which are in flight and underway, which builds their cash flow and sustainable business. And so if you knock on their door with thousands of other solutions, say, hey, please sell our stuff, they'll say, go away. So unless in that environment, unless you bring net new deals to the table, add to the services revenue, make it easy, frictionless, there's commercial upside for them or help solve their needs, then on that channel as well, they also won't care. So I think a lot of companies spend so much time spending on their ideal customer profile and gear sales team up to go tell our features out to the world. But if they actually spend the time on their targeted channels, on their targeted partners around actually helping them win inversely, then they'll go a long way to get their attention, more so in the current economic conditions where we're seeing continually the trends and reports saying that people aren't hitting their sort of sales targets right now.
Yeah, I just had a couple of points. I think Ryan again covered it super well. I think the mindset has to be win-win-win, right? So it's win for the customer, has to be. It's win for the partner, and then it's win for you. And I think if you put that mindset and think about the customer first and the partner and then yourself, I think it works because you're really trying to drive that empathy with that rest of the community. So that's, I think, is a absolutely critical point. The second thing of things that people often don't think about, or maybe sometimes don't fully appreciate, is the fact that, and Bryan mentioned it in passing, but I think it's really important to reemphasize, they're getting approached by dozens, if not hundreds, of current and prospective partners of all sizes and shapes. Everybody wants to do a lunch and learn. Everybody wants to do a customer dinner or prospect dinner and whatnot. Well, people have attention deficit disorder, ADD. They can't remember all those things. They're not trained to understand their own products they're selling, plus, tons of customer products. So I think one of the things that is super important is being very crisp, is being very clear, is being not kind of caught up in all the mumbo jumbo of the technology, and really being very precise about how can you help, right? And again, if you take the customer first lens to that, it helps them understand, hey, now I can connect the dots. That company's doing something my customer actually has talked about, and I can now make an introduction. You asked about co-sell. That's how co-sell works, right? It's like I can see the customer's needs, and I can see what the complete solution looks like, and now I can bring in the help make introductions. Then the partner is actually going to carry the bulk of the work, but it's going to benefit me. That mindset is often missing, and I think it's one of the big things that if people who do well, they see a very, very significant set of outcomes from that.
Really insightful. But you just mentioned about like win-win-win, but I guess it's going to be like 4 wins, soon, right? Because like marketplaces are now looping channel partners, and I think it would be interesting to maybe like explain how channel partners work within marketplace settings, and also like will survive this sort of change, right? Because I think a lot of companies feel that, so it's like either a marketplace or channel partner, but effectively what is happening, both of them could work together. So channel partners can help to transact faster on marketplace, to bring customers to marketplace, and so on. So I would love us to talk a little bit more about how channel partners will evolve within the marketplace settings.
In the current design, selling through marketplaces solely is you're quite restrained. You're conditioned to the partner programs and to conditions of what they allow and don't allow today. So it's not a dependent capability that you can set and forget, as Avanish said before. So, but with that, given the points at the start of this chat around the growth of marketplaces, the procurement life cycles, the licenses, the multi-year deals to go with it, they are increasing importance. So their influence is accelerating and only going to continue accelerating. So I suppose in terms of selling with the marketplaces, to answer your question, Roman, you've got to play by their rules and be the easiest partner to work with across the board around it if you want to get their attention. But you are beholden to them around it. And so that's why you can't just depend on them solely. So that's why I encourage the horizontal play of solving those workflows as we chatted around before, key to the marketplace and what they do, and then working out those nodes left and right of you. Who's the other partners also trying to sell that marketplace? Spend more time and efforts and energy on those ones once you've adhered to and gone above and beyond with the marketplace rules in order to sort of unlock some more growth opportunities. But there's no way that you can send all your hopes and dreams, all of your go-to-market on a marketplace alone, because you'll be restricted, and they've equally got saying they've got hundreds and thousands of partners also wanting to try and tap into that. You can very quickly become annoying, and I've seen that happen a lot.
I will I'll put a bit of controversy on the table. I'm going to say, Roman, to your question about channel partners, I think some of the ones that have been around for a long time are not going to be able to transition to the new world. And I think that's just part of the cycle of business and technology. Some of them have, I think, very traditional practices and understanding how to work in this world, in a much more dynamic way, where they don't have complete control over the customer relationship, where they have to work with multiple partners and maybe coexist with an MSP and a reseller, and their reseller relationship and so on. I think that's going to be an interesting test for some of these channel partners. So some of them will, some of them already are, right? And that's where the second point of my kind of controversy would be, or controversial statement might be, you have to think again about how the customers are buying, right? In certain segments, US federal government, US state governments, telco companies in Europe, etc., they actually only buy through resellers. So if you're a vendor, if you're a tech partner, an ISV, etc., working with one of the hyperscalers, you need to understand who those end customers are and what is their buying model. Because they're still, for a bunch of contractual reasons and perhaps relationships that have existed for a long time, they're going to continue buying through those resellers. So you need to figure out, are you going to work with the resellers? Are you going to figure out the economics between the marketplace provider, the reseller/channel partner, and how that ultimately also ties in with maybe a delivery partner and so on? So there's a lot of moving parts. It's not no longer an arm's length relationship like it used to be in a standard, 30 or 35% reseller discount. I think there's a lot more complexity and nuances to it. And the savvy companies are figuring that out, both as a vendor, as a platform provider, and as a channel partner.
Perhaps we will dive deeper into this channel partners and transaction of channel, including channel partners in marketplace motion in one of the sort of conversation later on. But just to stay on high level today, would love to touch the topics that everyone is talking about. Everyone is talking about AI. I'm really curious, like your thoughts in terms of how AI will change the dynamic potentially in terms of like partnerships. I mean, obviously, technology itself probably will not change the dynamic, but like how it may become an accelerant of this entire motion towards cloud marketplaces and also partnerships as well.
That's probably a topic for a whole conversation itself. But look, I think I've been in this business, like I said, for over 30 years. I have never seen something change the landscape as quickly as the last 6 months. It wasn't cloud, it wasn't mobile, it wasn't SaaS, none of those. Right now, there is no conversation that's happening without the words AI in it, right? For better or for worse. So, short answer is everything's going to change. The long answer, I think, is a little bit more nuanced, right? So, one, certainly, I think the customer imperative, again, is to figure out what the impact of AI is going to be across all their functions, whether it's production, whether it's development, whether it is marketing and sales and HR, product, etc. And by the way, I'm involved in a bunch of companies doing each of those things, so I'm kind of living it on a daily basis. But the customers are, frankly, everybody's trying to figure it out. Should I use it? How do I use it? What's the impact, etc. So I think the role for the platform providers at the marketplaces is, again, one of the things we mentioned earlier about being a bit of a curator, being someone who vets solutions, right? And helps bring to the table the ones that are high trust, high confidence, high quality, where you don't have risk of data being misused, etc., right? So I think they play an absolutely critical role in that framework, number one. Number two, I mentioned Google, but I think it also applies to Azure and AWS, is at the end of the day, those marketplaces are a conduit to consumption of the underlying infrastructure, right, for those platform vendors, right? So they will bring to the table solutions that they think are going to help drive the most consumption. So you have to kind of be cognizant of that and understand what is the volume of data, what is the egress, ingress costs, what are all these other things that are part of your process. So there's companies coming up to help figure that out, right? The marketplace may not be the neutral party that you think it is, because there is a vested interest in driving more consumption, right? Number two. And the number three, I am a big believer in industry solutions. And Bryan talked about the workflows connecting. I think when you think industries, that's a natural place for that to happen. And there too, I think hopefully the hyperscalers will continue recruiting a lot more industry players, and then frankly showing how easily they work together with the underlying common infrastructure, common data model. We certainly did that at Salesforce. ServiceNow, we did the same thing. And I think the hyperscalers will play a role in that too. And the marketplaces will be a way to expose those industry solutions with a bit of that, again, that pre-vetting or curation of those apps. So that's kind of my take on that.
There's lots in this topic, isn't there? I'll just add to Avanish's points briefly, saying, I think it's about the marketplaces, very easily should be able to work on the curation and providing those frictionless experiences. And so if I'm using certain products this way, what should I use? How do I, low code, no code, AI recommended, just get into these flows and carry on. So it all looks, feels, and seamless like you're in the one product, even though you might be using a whole smorgasbords of various options. But to Avanish's earlier point, like the whole industry's just leveled up over in the last sort of 6 months. Everything's powered by AI, powered by OpenAI. Every application I use myself has all got some new feature, which they wouldn't have built a year ago, whether it's a fun toy just to show that they're getting involved or it's something actually useful. It's still very early days, but it's moving fast.
I loved how Avanish talked about marketplaces kind of thinking through their own customer lens and their own KPI lens, right? So they think like, how do we sort of bring more relevant technologies, cutting edge technologies who are sort of trusted, so we will make our customers happy, and in the process we will improve our business performance as well. So look, I guess we can continue for much longer. I would love us to stay today for on a strategic sort of like high level, but again, hopefully we'll have a chance to dig deeper in specific topics later on. If you would give one advice as a way to wrap up this conversation to, let's say, a SaaS founder or like a company leader who either starting to think about the marketplace journey or maybe made like a few initial steps, have some success, but not sort of a scale like CrowdStrike or Palo Alto. So what would be your advice to this person?
I would say map out, chat to your ideal current customers or ideal future customers, understand their workflows. What are they using in and around your solution before and afterwards, in conjunction with the marketplace? Start there and build deep in that space, because you're not going to get the traction with the hyperscaler early stage, especially if you're just getting going.
Just building on that, I think of this as a strategic decision. It's not a tactical, it's definitely not a technical decision. It's a business decision. And therefore, do your homework, talk to people, talk to your peers, talk to industry experts, talk to your investors. It is not a decision that you can make and easily back out of, right? So, especially in the early stage, that focus is important. And therefore, trying to understand exactly what that business strategy is going to look like becomes even more important.
It's been great to have this conversation with two of you, great experts, and thank you so much for sharing so much insights. I learned a lot myself personally, and I think we tease out a few interesting ideas. And thank you so much, Avanish, for bringing your wealth of knowledge and making somewhat controversial statements. I think I frankly I completely agree with you. So sort of some companies will strive in this marketplace motion. Some companies will not. And Bryan, thank you so much for. I love your idea of like support groups, between sort of companies who also in the same stage of marketplace kind of adoption or kind of trying to figure out, so you can build a small support group and kind of try to work together and maybe like exchange knowledge and support and so on. So I hope we will have another conversation in a bit. And but thank you so much for joining me today.
Thanks, Roman.
Thank you, Roman. Thanks for having us.